Welcome and thanks for joining us. My guest today is Darren Rolls, Chief Technology and Chief Information Security Officer at SailPoint. How are you, Darren?
I'm very well, thank you. Great to be here.
Quite an impressive title. Maybe you can share with the audience how you got both titles.
Absolutely. Well, I've been the Chief Technology Officer at SailPoint for the last 8 years, where I'm responsible for our technology strategy and the internals of what we produce as a product. And then as we've matured as a business, someone needed to be the CISO. I obviously didn't step back fast enough. It is a very, very difficult job, but the intersection of identity and security is a very important point, very important place, and so it's a great place to focus. So it's very useful.
So the classification for SailPoint is Identity Access Management. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah, that's our broad term, broad sort of category, and then within that, we're the leaders in identity governance and administration.
So you just use that word trippingly in the tongue. Identity governance means a lot of different things to different people. What does it mean to you, and what does it mean to our listeners?
Yeah, and obviously, that word governance can be used in many terms, and really in this space, it primarily refers to the notion of strong administration, audit, and oversight for who has access to systems, resources, and data. It's very much also now the term that's used to refer to the business interface. Security systems need to be owned and managed by people in business, and identity governance gives that business interface to those security systems.
So, key factor in cybersecurity, how so?
In general, you can't manage what you can't see, and administration is a primary principle in any security system. And so really what we're doing in identity governance is allowing people that understand access to control security and administration systems. Obviously, security is complex and a highly sophisticated topic, and our job is to make it manageable by somebody in a line of business.
You pick up a newspaper and you can't help but seeing information and headlines about data breaches in the private and public sectors. From WikiLeaks to Snowden to Morgan Stanley, Monsanto, even Yahoo. So when you see these attacks and statistics, what's at play here?
Well, I think I myself, I'm a very avid reader of forensic reporting when it's available, and that is the detailed review that happens after a breach. And when you look at those forensic reports, that pretty much on a number of the incidents that you just mentioned. Basic identity and access management mistakes are inevitably either at fault or in play. And these are simple things like weak passwords, orphan accounts, or inappropriate access. At the end of the day, the bad guys are attacking data, and our security systems are controlled by the authorization systems that secure them. And so we often see very, very basic things. And mentioned there an orphan account. If you're a bad guy, the first thing you're going to look for is an account that can give access that is not being used. Because if it's being used, you stand a chance of being noticed. And so accounts that don't belong to anybody, that have been left behind, are a point of attack. And so, as I say, it's often these very, very simple things that end up being at fault.
Now, would you consider that hygiene for just managing systems? Is that a word that would be applied here?
That's a great term, actually. Yes, it most certainly is. We very frequently in identity governance talk about a life cycle. Joiner, mover, leaver, an appropriate control cycle for the hygiene of accounts and access. And we also talk very much about understanding that access. We will often say who does have access to systems, who should have access to systems, and what is being done with that access. That's hygiene, right? It's basic administration and understanding the flow of access.
This would be something like Snowden. Is that a joiner lever? Is that an application there?
It is. In actual fact, there obviously at the point of there wasn't a leave point, right? With the vulnerability there happened whilst he was had bona fide access. But at that point, there wasn't any life cycle review. I think as we've looked at that, he moved positions across the environment. There was a move that happened, right? As he moved positions, he retained entitlement, and that wasn't sufficiently managed. But at the end of the day, I think there was no behavioral analysis and monitoring for him. So
would he be classified as an insider threat? He wasn't really an employee, but he was an insider.
Absolutely, he was an insider, right? He certainly wasn't, a hacker from, a notorious source. He was an insider with justified access. And that's one of the reasons why, one of the 5 principles of identity governance is this notion of analytics, being able to understand appropriate access. It's all very well that I have a certain set of access, but am I using them appropriately? And obviously, he wasn't using his entitlements and access appropriately. I think that's turned to be proved.
Identity has been a major attack vector in most government and private sector attacks over the last few years here. Could you talk why this is and how identity governance is changing the cybersecurity landscape?
Yeah, I think it comes back to a couple of things we touched on there. One, this idea of taking a holistic view of that security model and putting it in the hands of people that manage business processes, that manage people. So I think that's been a very key part of this. But fundamentally, it's about understanding who has access to what. And again, it sounds so simple. You really would have thought that it was something everybody can do. But to be able to find a person and say who they are and what they should have access to, and is that access and those entitlements being used appropriately, it's no simple task.
So authentication is not enough, is it?
Absolutely not. We quite often academically think of the 5 A's of security, and authentication is the first, right? That notion of establishing a principle, establishing a session. It's quite often login, right? A password, a smart card, whatever it might be. But behind that are 4 considerably more important A's, and the second of that is authorization. Actually knowing that once I think I know who Darren is, what should he have access to? Is that access appropriate? Are we controlling it? The third one behind that is then audit. We have to be able to audit this stuff. We have to be able to create oversight. Behind that is analytics as well. So there's lots of things that sit behind authorization to make it valid.
Well, thank you, Darren. We're going to take a pause here for a short break. My guest today is Darren Rolls, Chief Technology and Chief Information Security Officer from SailPoint. I'm your moderator, John Gilroy, on the discussion Identity Access Management, sponsored by SailPoint on Federal News Radio 1500 AM and federalnewsradio.com.